Can you be my date for one day? The lonely, single dad. Rancher smiled, unaware she was his daughter's teacher. Dusty Ridge, Wyoming. Autumn, 1887. The wind rolled through the narrow streets of Dusty Ridge, carrying the scent of dry hay and pine wood. The town sat quietly beneath the looming gray clouds, horses tethered outside the general store, and wheels of old wagons creaking along muddy paths. Wade Colton stood near the blacksmith's, arms folded, hat low over his eyes. At 33, the man had built one of the largest cattle ranches in the valley, but he'd lived the last 3 years in silence, ever since his wife passed on during winter childbirth. His daughter, Rosie, barely 4 now, rarely spoke to anyone. She clung to routine, avoided loud sounds, and trusted only a few: the stable dog, an old rocking chair, and Wade. And today, she had whispered something new. "I won't go if there's no mama." Harvest Blessing Day was in 3 days, a town tradition where children stood with their families, holding hands before the mayor, giving thanks for the harvest and their homes. The unwritten rule: no child stood alone. Wade had tried everything. He even asked Miss Lorna, the cook. Rosie only screamed. So he rode into town with one quiet plan: find someone, anyone, willing to stand beside him and Rosie for one day. That was when he saw her. At the edge of the market square, a woman was arguing with Mr. Grayson, the dry goods owner. "I told you," she said firmly. "My father is gone. I'm not paying off a debt that was never mine." Wade paused, studying her from across the stalls. She stood tall, auburn hair soaked from the drizzle, hands clenched at her sides. Her dress was simple, patched near the hem, and yet there was a steel calm in her voice. "Then you'll find your name crossed off my customer list," Grayson barked. "That's your choice," she replied, turning away with quiet dignity. Wade stepped forward, tipping his hat. "Ma'am?" She looked up, brows raised. "I could not help overhearing. Your name?" June Hartley." "I have a proposition." He cleared his throat, uncomfortable. "I need someone to pretend to be my daughter's mother. For one day. For Harvest Blessing." Her mouth parted. "Excuse me?" "She needs someone to stand with her. I'll pay you. Handsomely." He opened his coat slightly, revealing an envelope. Enough to clear any trouble with Mr. Grayson. And more. June stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "You want to hire me? To be your date?" "For one day," he said softly. "Just one." She hesitated. "Why me?" "Because you do not flinch when people raise their voice, and my daughter needs someone who does not scare easy." June shook her head. "I'm not some actress. I do not play pretend. I am not asking you to be anything but kind to a little girl. She deserves that much." June's shoulders dropped. She looked toward the store, then down at her old boots. "My mother's ill. Medicine is not cheap." Wade simply handed her the envelope. Silence stretched between them. Then she nodded. "One day, that's all." They rode in silence to his ranch. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing rolling pastures and wooden fences stretching toward the hills. As they approached the white farmhouse, the door flew open. "Papa!" a small voice cried out. Rosie darted out barefoot on the porch, hair wild, cheeks flushed. She stopped short when she saw June. Then, without a word, she ran, not to Wade, but straight into June's arms. The young woman gasped as the girl hugged her waist tightly, face buried in her skirt. "This is my teacher," Rosie said, beaming up. "She said yes, she's gonna be my mama." Wade froze. June stood frozen too, hand trembling above Rosie's head. The wind quieted. And in that stillness, Wade whispered under his breath, "You're her teacher?" June met his eyes, wide, startled, shaken. Neither of them knew it yet, but nothing would be pretend after this. Wade stood at the edge of the porch, arms folded across his chest, as June knelt in the dirt, planting the last of the marigolds beside the front walkway. Rosie sat quietly next to her, watching the small, gentle hands press each bloom into the soil. "I had no idea," Wade finally said. June didn't look up. That I was Rosie's teacher? He nodded, feeling a rare sense of discomfort. I never pick her up. I always send Clara. She never mentioned your name. Rosie barely speaks at school, June said softly. She draws, she watches, but she does not talk. Not until that day. Ah. Wade lowered his eyes. She has always been like that since her mother passed. There was a silence between them, one padded with the weight of things neither dared say aloud. Then June brushed her hands clean on her skirt and stood. Look, she began, voice calm but firm. If I had known it was your daughter I was agreeing to play mother for, I might have thought twice. But Rosie, she looked at me like I was already someone she knew. She did, Wade said, remembering the moment with a hollow ache. She ran to you like she has never run to anyone. They both looked through the open front door, where Rosie was sitting on the floor, coloring something with thick crayons. She trusts you, Wade said quietly. June hesitated before speaking again. People do not usually say that to me anymore. He turned to face her. Why not? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled a folded piece of paper from her coat pocket and handed it to him. A boy in my old school went missing. No one ever found him. I was the last one seen with him that day. The rumors never stopped. Her voice cracked slightly. I was cleared, but not in their eyes. Wade looked down at the paper. An old newspaper clipping with her photo and a headline that made his stomach twist. June looked away. So, I left the city, came here. I told myself I could disappear into small-town silence. Then Rosie showed up in my class. Wade folded the paper slowly, his eyes unreadable. And you stayed, even after all that? I did not come here to fix anything, she replied. I just wanted to breathe. That evening, the sky turned lavender as the sun sank behind the distant hills. The three of them sat on the front porch, Wade polishing a horseshoe, June sketching something in a notebook, Rosie curled up beside her with a picture book. Rosie tugged on June's sleeve and handed her a drawing, a crooked house, a stick figure with a hat, a woman with long hair, and a small girl between them. My family, Rosie said, her voice barely above a whisper. Wade's hand froze mid-polish. June stared at the picture for a long time before whispering, That is beautiful, Rosie. Is that me? Wade asked gently. Rosie nodded. And that's you, she said to June. June smiled, her throat tight. I'm honored. Later that night, Wade lingered in the hallway. The smell of cinnamon and warm bread floated from the kitchen, a scent he hadn't known in years. June had insisted on baking with Rosie, saying it would be a fun way to help with sensory comfort. Rosie had giggled while stirring the dough, cheeks dusted in flour, eyes bright with joy. Now, through the crack in Rosie's bedroom door, he saw June sitting at the edge of the bed, softly humming a lullaby. Rosie lay curled under a quilt, eyes fluttering shut. June's hand gently stroked her hair. For a long moment, Wade did not move. He felt it then, not the sense of duty that had weighed on him for years, not the hollow silence of grief, but something terrifyingly tender. Peace. Warmth. A future. In that quiet space filled with Rosie's even breath and the soft scent of cinnamon, Wade realized this was the first time in 3 years that his house, his heart, had felt like a home again. The morning of the harvest blessing arrived bright and crisp, the golden light spilling over the rolling hills and brushing the rooftops of Dusty Ridge with soft warmth. Church bells rang in the distance as townsfolk bustled along the main road, decorating booths, carrying pie tins, tying orange ribbons to wooden posts. It was a day meant for families, and everyone knew that. That was what made the McKenna family's arrival so stunning. June stepped down from the wagon wearing a modest cotton dress the color of sunlit wheat. The hem brushed just past her boots, and a soft shawl hugged her shoulders. Rosie had picked the dress from the wardrobe at home that morning, saying simply, "This looks like a mom dress." Wade offered his hand to help June down, then lifted Rosie gently into his arms. The three of them stood side by side, and Dusty Ridge stared. "There's Wade," someone whispered. "And Is that a woman with him? Looks like he finally moved on. Poor Lily. That child deserves a mother. June caught the looks, the nods, the subtle glances, but held her head high. She wasn't here for the town. She was here for Rosie, and the way the little girl clung to her hand made her forget every whisper. They walked together into the town square. Rosie tugged at June's sleeve, pointing toward a booth where children were dipping strings into melted sugar and corn syrup. "Candy corn?" June asked, smiling. Rosie nodded excitedly. June rolled up her sleeves. "Let's make some then." Wade stood nearby, arms crossed, leaning against the fence post, watching the two of them with quiet fascination. June was patient and playful, guiding Rosie's small fingers through the process, helping her coat the strings and set them to cool. Rosie giggled, her cheeks sticky with sugar, and never once let go of June's hand. "Look at her," came a voice beside Wade. He turned to see Mrs. Callahan, the elderly widow who ran the quilt stand. "That little girl is glowing," she said. "I haven't seen Rosie laugh like that ever. That woman, she brought her back to life." Wade swallowed hard. "Yeah," he whispered, more to himself than her, "she did." As the day wore on, June helped Rosie carve a pumpkin, then guided her through the hay maze, and even let the girl paint her cheeks with tiny stars and leaves. The little one clung to her side, not out of fear, but out of comfort, familiarity, trust. When the sun began to dip, painting the sky in hues of orange and rose, Pastor Mitchell rang the bell for the final part of the celebration, the family blessing. Everyone gathered around the long wooden table at the center of town, now draped with garlands, bread loaves, and lit candles. It was a Dusty Ridge tradition. Every family came forward to join hands, say a prayer of gratitude, and receive a blessing for the year to come. Wade hesitated. June looked at him. "We don't have to," she began. But Rosie tugged both their hands. "Please," she said quietly. So they stepped forward. The crowd parted as Wade, June, and Rosie approached the table. They joined hands, June's fingers in Rosie's, Rosie's in Wade's, Wade's in June's. For a moment, the world hushed. They stood together, a tall, rugged man with eyes like dusk, a woman in a borrowed dress with a soft strength in her spine, and a child whose face finally showed light. From across the table, the pastor smiled. "You three look like a family meant to be." June blinked back, sudden warmth in her eyes. Wade turned slightly to meet her gaze. In that one look, neither of them spoke, but something shifted, something real, something neither had planned for. As the blessing ended, and the people clapped, Rosie leaned her head on June's side. June didn't know when it happened. Maybe when the child pressed sugar onto her nose. Maybe when Wade smiled for the first time all day. Maybe when the wind carried the smell of baked bread and laughter down the street. But her heart had stopped pretending, and it scared her more than any scandal ever had. The house was quieter than usual that night, though it was filled with more warmth than it had known in years. The rain had passed, leaving behind the scent of damp earth and a sky brushed with pale starlight. Dinner was simple: baked beans, roasted squash, and honey biscuits. June had helped Rosie set the table, carefully aligning the mismatched plates and folding the napkins into little triangles. Wade had lit the oil lamps himself, the flickering glow casting soft gold onto the wooden walls. The three of them sat like they had done it 100 times before, not like strangers bound by a deal, but like something closer, older, unspoken. Rosie chewed thoughtfully, her little fingers sticky with honey, then looked up at June. "Will you stay forever, Mama?" The room went still, as if time held its breath. June froze, her spoon halfway to her mouth. Her chest tightened with something that was not fear, not exactly, something deeper, something aching. Wade looked up sharply, his eyes flicking between his daughter and the woman across from him. He looked like he had been caught in the middle of a memory. June lowered her gaze, her lips parting, but no sound came out. "I mean," Rosie continued, voice soft, hopeful, "you are my mama now, right?" Wade set down his fork. The clink of metal against ceramic felt louder than it should have. "I think it is time for bed, sweetheart." Rosie's shoulders slumped, but she did not argue, just slid off the chair and took June's hand without a word. Her trust was quiet, but complete. After tucking her in, June lingered at the door for a moment, watching Rosie curl into her blanket with the stuffed rabbit she had not touched in over a year. The rabbit was old, worn, stitched at the ear. But tonight, it lay beneath Rosie's cheek like it belonged there. The house creaked softly in the silence. When June came back downstairs, Wade was not in the kitchen or the sitting room. The lamp by the window was still burning. His coffee cup sat untouched. She found him out by the barn, the lantern casting long shadows over his shoulders as he brushed down one of the horses. His movements were steady, practiced, silent. The kind of silence that did not beg to be filled. She leaned on the doorway, arms crossed, voice quiet. "Is this where you hide when you do not know what to say?" He did not turn. "It is where I go when I need things to make sense." June stepped inside, her boots whispering over the straw. "She asked me if I would stay forever." "I heard." "She called me Mama." "I heard that too." A long pause stretched between them, filled only by the soft brushing of the horse's mane. "I did not plan on this," Wade said quietly. "Any of it." "Neither did I," June replied. Her eyes stayed on the floor. "I came for a day, one day, to help a man I did not know, to play a part and walk away." Wade finally looked at her. His face was unreadable in the lamplight. "But?" he asked. "But she is not a role to me," June said. Her voice trembled. "That little girl, she is not pretend." Silence again. Then June took a breath, stepped closer. "Have you ever thought, just maybe, what if we were not acting?" Wade held her gaze for a heartbeat too long, then looked away. And that silence was an answer in itself. June's throat tightened, her hands dropped to her sides. "I was hired," she said softly, "paid to stand beside you, to make your daughter smile." She looked toward the house, toward Rosie's window, glowing faint behind the curtains like a lighthouse flickering through fog. "But she does not deserve confusion, or broken promises, or another person walking away." She met Wade's eyes one last time, her own full of unspoken grief. "She deserves more than someone who was paid to care." Then she turned and walked into the night, her boots crunching over gravel. The wind picked up, tugging gently at her shawl. Behind her, Wade stood alone in the stable with the truth heavy on his shoulders and the scent of her still lingering in the hay-dusted air. The morning sun stretched thin light over the hills of Dusty Ridge, casting long, golden shadows on the front porch of the Colton Ranch. A breeze stirred the dust along the wooden planks, lifting it like breath held too long and finally released. June stood at the steps, her travel bag in hand. The air smelled of hay and saddle oil, of breakfast that had gone cold, and something almost like regret. Her fingers tightened around the worn leather strap as she took one last look at the house behind her, the creaky screen door, the porch swing that had not swung in years, the little window where Rosie had once waved good night, sleepy-eyed and smiling. It felt like walking away from a dream too real to forget, too fragile to hold. She stepped down. And that was when Wade came running. "June!" he shouted, breath ragged, hat nearly flying off his head. His boots thundered against the steps, eyes wide with something that made her stomach drop. "She is gone." June dropped her bag. "What?" "Rosie," he gasped. "I went to wake her. The bed was empty. I checked every room, the barn, even the hayloft. I have searched everywhere." Her heart seized. Where would she go? "I do not know," Wade said, his voice cracking beneath the pressure. "She has never done anything like this before. Not without telling someone." Within the hour, the whole town was searching. Word traveled fast in Dusty Ridge, faster than wind. Neighbors left their chores, children were gathered in groups and told to watch the roads. Horses were saddled, boots laced tight, people spread out across the meadows, toward the pond, the creek, the empty schoolhouse, and the orchard behind Main Street. June rode beside Wade, calling Rosie's name over and over until her throat ached. Her mind was a blur of panic, her chest hollow with fear. What if Rosie had fallen somewhere? What if she had wandered into the woods? What if— Then a memory surfaced, quiet and small, but sharp as a thorn. One quiet afternoon, Rosie had whispered while coloring at the kitchen table, "Mama loved the rose garden. She said it smelled like happy." June's heart lurched. She turned sharply in the saddle. "The chapel garden, behind the church. Go." Wade spurred his horse, and they galloped toward the edge of town. Past the wooden fences and the rusted gate, behind the overgrown chapel wall, was the once tended rose garden, now wild and tangled with memory. There, curled up between blooming red and gold roses, was Rosie. Her tiny arms wrapped around her knees. Her dress was streaked with dirt, her face buried, her shoulders shaking. June was off her horse before it stopped, running through thorns and petals. "Rosie!" she cried, falling to her knees. The little girl looked up. Her eyes were swollen, her cheeks blotched. "You left," Rosie whispered. "I woke up, and you were not there." 2. June's heart cracked. "I thought, maybe if I stayed here, Mama would come back again, or you would." June pulled her close, wrapped her arms around the tiny body, pressing Rosie's head against her chest. "I am here," she whispered. "I am right here, baby girl." Rosie sobbed harder. "Do not go again, please. I do not want to be alone anymore." June kissed her hair, rocked her gently. "I am so sorry, Rosie. I never wanted to hurt you." Then hoofbeats thundered behind them. Wade dismounted in one breath, stumbling into the garden like a man lost at sea. When he saw them, June kneeling in the mud, Rosie clinging to her like roots to earth, he stopped. The sight shattered something inside him. His breath hitched, his hands trembled at his sides, and then, quietly, like rain on dry ground, Wade Colton wept. He dropped beside them, arms wide, and folded both of them into his chest. "I was trying to protect her," he said hoarsely, "protect myself, but I cannot anymore." He looked at June, eyes wet and raw. "I hired you for one day," he said, "but somewhere between pretending, my heart forgot it was pretend." Rosie nestled between them, her small hands clinging tightly. "I do not know what happens next," Wade whispered, pressing his forehead to June's. "But I know this. I do not want to lose either of you." The sun dipped low behind the ridgeline, casting a warm, golden light across the fields of Dusty Ridge. Shadows stretched long across the dirt roads and golden pastureland, as if the earth itself were exhaling after a long day. In the quiet back room of a modest cottage near the edge of town, June sat beside her mother's bed. The air smelled of chamomile and wood smoke. A single oil lamp flickered on the nightstand, casting a soft glow over the quilted blanket that covered Mrs. Hartley's legs. The older woman, though frail in body, still held that piercing gaze, the one that had once seen through every one of June's childhood fibs. She watched her daughter now with a look that was not just knowing, but kind. "So," she said gently, voice thin but steady, "did you fall in love pretending to be someone else? Or did you just forget to pretend?" June gave a soft laugh, brushing a stray wisp of hair from her mother's temple. Her hands trembled slightly, whether from nerves or something else, she could not tell. "I do not know how it happened," she whispered. "One moment, I was helping a little girl tie her shoes. The next, she held on to me like I was the only person who mattered. And Wade—" She paused, blinking down at her lap. "He looks at me like he has not seen sunlight in years, like I am something real." Mrs. Hartley reached for her hand, her grip weak but warm. "Then what are you waiting for?" she asked. "If that little girl sees you, really sees you, and that man does too, is it not time you saw yourself that way?" June swallowed hard. "I was only supposed to help them for a day," she murmured. "Nothing more. I promised myself it would just be that, a favor, a kindness. Now it feels like my heart refuses to leave." Mrs. Hartley's eyes softened. "You have spent too long making decisions out of fear," she said. "It is time you chose something because you love it, not because it is safe." That night, June rode back to the ranch. The wind tugged at her shawl as her horse trotted the familiar trail beneath a sky blooming with stars. The porch light was still on. Rosie's tiny boots sat by the door, muddy and askew. Her crayon drawings were stuck to the windows, one in particular showing a stick-figure family, a tall man with a hat, a woman in a dress, and a little girl in between, all holding hands under a giant yellow sundae. June stood at the threshold, heart pounding, and knocked. Wade opened the door. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes tired, but they lit up when they saw her. Still, he said nothing. Not yet. "I cannot do it anymore," June said softly. Wade's brow furrowed. "Do what?" "Pretend," she replied. "I cannot pretend this is just a job, or that it was just for one day. I cannot smile and walk away like it was all some script." Wade stepped back instinctively, giving her space. But June stepped forward. "I do not want to be a role in your life," she said. "I want to be real. I want to stay. But not because you need someone to play mother. Because I want to belong somewhere. Because I want this to be mine too." Wade's breath caught. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, he reached for her, one hand finding her cheek, the other resting gently at her waist. "You do not have to act like her mother," he whispered. "You already are." June's eyes filled. "Since the first time she hugged you," Wade added, "I knew." They stood there in silence, the world narrowing to one quiet breath, then another. Outside, the wind carried the scent of hay and apple blossoms. Inside, something shifted. Not like an ending, but like a beginning. The next Sunday morning, the people of Dusty Ridge gathered in front of the white chapel, sunlight streaming through cotton clouds. The townsfolk whispered, casting glances toward the man stepping up the wooden steps of the old podium. Wade Colton, boots dusted, shirt neatly pressed, eyes steady. Behind him stood June, hands gently resting on Rosie's shoulders. "I have something to say," Wade began, voice firm but calm. "You all know me as the man who keeps to himself, the widower, the rancher, and until recently, that was enough." He looked toward June, his expression softening. "But this woman," he continued, "she was supposed to be here for a day, and in just one day, she brought life back to a house that forgot how to laugh." A hush fell over the crowd. "She is not my guest. She is not someone passing through. She is not pretend. June is family. If you have questions about who she is to me and to Rosie, this is your answer." He took June's hand in his, clear and proud. "She belongs in this town as much as I do, maybe more." The people murmured, then clapped, slowly, then all at once. Mrs. Bramble, the baker's wife, stood up and smiled through her tears. "We have not seen Rosie smile like that since, well, ever." From that day on, Dusty Ridge no longer whispered behind their backs. They waved when June passed by on her way to the schoolhouse. They offered extra pie crusts and firewood. When June planted a new rosebush outside the ranch, folks stopped to admire it. When Rosie learned to say thank you loud enough for a storekeeper to hear, the entire town seemed to take pride. At home, June helped Wade patch the leaky roof, hammering alongside him, while Rosie handed up nails from a bucket. In the kitchen, they made cinnamon biscuits together. June showed Rosie how to knead, Wade taught her how to count eggs, and by dusk, flour dusted everyone's noses. And when Rosie spelled out family in wooden blocks on the floor, June hugged her tight. Wade leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, heart full. He had hired a woman for one day, but now, that day had become a home. And June, once running from everything she had lost, was finally choosing something to stay for. The sun had just crept above the horizon, casting golden streaks across the autumn fields of Dusty Ridge. The scent of hay and distant pine danced in the breeze. On the front porch of the Colton Ranch, June stepped out with a tray of warm biscuits. Her hair was tied in a loose bun, apron dusted with flour, the morning light catching the quiet curve of her smile. Out in the field, Wade knelt beside Rosie, helping her pick a bouquet of wild sunflowers, her small fingers clutching the stems, her boots muddy from the morning dew. June called out softly, "Breakfast is ready." Wade looked up and smiled, not just the polite curve of lips, but the kind that reached deep into the eyes. He stood, brushing off his hands, then reached for Rosie's free one. Together, they walked up to the porch. Wade stopped in front of June, his daughter at his side, and took her hand gently. "I asked you for one day," he said, voice low, rough with meaning. "But every day since, I've wished it was more." He took a breath, steady and sure. "Can you be my family? Forever?" June blinked, tears already forming. "I thought you would never ask," she whispered, laughing through her tears. Before she could say anything more, Rosie wedged herself between them, tugging on both their hands. "Yes," the little girl shouted, "she already is." Wade and June both laughed, and June leaned down to kiss Rosie's forehead. Wade wrapped his arm around them both. Later that afternoon, the three of them rode horseback across the golden pastures, June on her mare, Wade on his chestnut stallion, and Rosie between them on a pony with white spots and a pink ribbon. As they crested the hill, the valley stretched before them, endless, warm, alive. Behind them lay stories of loss, of pain, of pretending. But ahead was only light, and the promise of a future not built on roles or arrangements, but on love. The wind carried Rosie's voice as she laughed and pointed to a hawk in the sky. And Wade looked to June, who turned to him with the kind of smile that felt like home. Together, hand in hand, they rode toward the sunset, a real family now. Forever. And just like that, from a single question under a quiet sky, "Can you be my date for one day?" came a love that healed not just one heart, but three. From pretend to promise. From strangers to family. If this story of second chances and quiet miracles touched your heart, don't forget to hit that hype button to show your love. And for more timeless love tales across the Wild West, from shy cowboys to fearless school teachers, subscribe now to Wild West Love Stories. Because out here, love rides in with the dust, but stays for a lifetime. See y'all in the next story.